Evening, everybody, at this bank holiday Monday. I am Kate Weinberg, who is a journalist and an author, author of a best-selling book, The Truants. And also, she is a really good friend of mine who has helped me with my writing. She helped me edit my last book, Every Family Has a Story. But actually, we're not going to, so she's joined, and I hope, I've just sent her an invite. There we go, let's try again. We're going to talk about long COVID, actually, and the mind-body connection and the journey that she's been on in dealing with it. I hope she is able to join. We tested and I've invited her. So those of you that have joined, have you had a nice bank holiday? I really hope you have. It says Kate Weinberg is unable to join. I know we'll get there because we always do. So not to worry. Sorry, everybody. She will be with me in a moment. Have you all had a nice bank holiday? How many of you worked on your bank holiday? There you are.
Phew, I'm so sorry. I couldn't find you.
There we are. You find me.
I found you.
So lovely to see you, and thank you everyone that's joined us on your bank holiday Monday. And yes, I mean, you're a brilliant novelist and journalist, and I was saying that you really helped me with Every Family Has a Story, but we're not going to be talking about your talent. We're going to be talking about long COVID. And do you want to kind of start by saying when you first kind of fully realized there was a connection with the mind aspect of it that is often very unrecognized?
Yeah, that's such a brilliant question to kick off with, because I think there was not an exact moment. There was a process of realizing that my mood and my anxiety and my stress that was created from having this sickness, which is a very physical sickness, seemed to have some kind of looping effect and would exacerbate my symptoms. And not only that, but there was a sense that I'd go in and out of thinking that I was an imposter somehow. You know, there was a feeling, it was a roller coaster ride. And one moment you're thinking, I'm really sick and I just wish people would understand that this is not just a bit of fatigue and this is just not sort of me with slight lingering symptoms.
Being a hypo, yeah.
Long COVID, and I'm not being a wimp here and I'm dying to get back to my life. And then other moments of feeling full despair and thinking this could be it. And
this could be my life, and I really don't like this life.
Yeah, this could be it. I could have fast forwarded into my 90s somehow, where getting a cup of tea is incredibly hard work. And because it was such a new condition as well, that I had no sense of the length of it or what was sort of the average amount of time for people to come out of this, and doctors
and
were
nobody knew. It wasn't just you. I mean, no doctors knew. There was no research, there was no protocols. You were kind of in
and I want to say
new territory.
New territory. And I should probably kick off by saying I'm recovered now, and up until a couple of weeks ago or possibly a month ago, I found that very frightening to say I've recovered, because the mind plays such tricks on you with this illness, and you doubt yourself because you go into periods of what feel like remission and you're able to do a certain amount, and then suddenly something can trigger you, and in a way you spend so much time working out what it is exactly that's triggered me. Have I eaten the wrong thing? Have I done too much exercise? Have I overworked? Have I stressed my system in some way? But the truth is, I've realized now that the problem comes after those symptoms start, which is the symptoms begin and then you start to panic. And once that happens, you can feel your body going into free fall. And when I realized that, it was just a sort of, it wasn't a precise moment, but it was there was a period of time where I started to think, oh, hang on a minute, there is an aspect of this that I can harness the power of my mind to do something about my symptoms. And I was very lucky because I'd written about the despair and the waxing and waning of the symptoms and the imposter syndrome for an article I'd written initially for the Daily Mail. And a woman called Lauren Stoney got in touch with me and said, listen, I can really help you with this. I can see by your article the loop that you're going on every day.
Can I pause you and focus from the sort of psychological perspective on the loop? So what I've got from you is that in having long COVID, it brings lots of psychological symptoms, that then there is a huge mental component of you questioning yourself or forensically kind of Sherlock Holming yourself, trying to work out why. But often there's a criticism or a kind of fury and also a panic that when you know, if you've had a good day and you wake up utterly unable to move the next day, then there's the kind of third aspect of waking up. A second aspect of waking up depleted is, what have I done now? And then this is going to go on forever. And what I want to kind of talk about from the psychological perspective of the mind-body connection is, of course, in the 18th century, or whatever it was, Descartes had the split, the Cartesian split of the mind and the body, and the two were completely separate entities, and that the mind had thought and the body had its own kind of direction. And actually how the brain works is the mind and the body. People say mind body as one word. The two are completely interconnected, and every thought that you have has a physiological sensation, and every physiological sensation you have triggers a thought. And from the brain, this is if you're looking at it from a neural perspective, there are neural pathways made up of transmitters and hormones and chemicals that run through these pathways that connect your mind and your body, and they are in charge of your breathing, they're in control of your digestion, your pain sensations, and most importantly in this case, your thinking. So that in the actual charge of your hormones and your neurotransmitters, if you're in a panic, it sends cortisol flaming through your system, and then of course heightens all of your body sensations. But people don't know that. They kind of think that until you realized and had that moment of recognition, which a lot of people wouldn't do, you would have no idea that what you actually thought was an influence that you could harness to dampen down the flooding and kind of stabilize yourself. And obviously what Lauren did was a massive part of that.
Exactly. And I'm really curious, why do you think it is that such an obvious thing? Because as soon as you recognize it, it becomes very obvious. Well, of course our mind and body are connected, because when my mind's telling my hand to wave in the air, then there are signals happening all the time. Why have we got to a point in medicine where we view the things so separately, where mental health and physical health are just compartmentalized totally?
I think it comes from Descartes, and what I would prefer is that we would just have the word health. You have no physical health when you have bad mental health, and when you have bad physical health, it absolutely totally compromises your mental health. So there's health, and
yes,
underneath it are these two. Are these two aspects that influence and shape each other. I don't know if people are listening, whether they recognize this in themselves about when they've been ill. Are people listening who've had long COVID, who had some of these symptoms and didn't know what to do? And do you want to talk to us a bit about Lauren Stoney? I tell you, but sorry, just to add one more thing. One of the reasons I think medics split the mental and the physical is they want to have a protocol that you can say, you have this, I'll give you this, and that is your outcome, and that it's evidence based, and
Right.
it's had a randomized control trial, and it's got the golden kind of tick of this works, nice guidelines.
And
But
it's
with this kind of thing,
incredibly hard to measure.
yeah.
So that's when once you realize that certainly what happened to me, Lauren Stoney was a big part of my recovery process, but there were other things that I'd also like to discuss with you. But to talk about Lauren, what she does first, she is a lightning process. It's called the lightning process technique, I think. And if you look it up on the internet, you'll find all these sort of quack alerts, don't go near it, this is all hocus pocus. And there seems to be a lot of sort of anxiety about anything that suggests that you can mentally try and help your symptoms. And I think that one of the things that I've really recognized over this is also an anxiety on the part of the patient, that this means that somehow your illness is psychosomatic, and that if you say that you can use your mind to help your symptoms, then actually the illness must come from your mind. And that's something that I can imagine that I'm aware that ME sufferers and CFS sufferers, and there are so many illnesses that have these kind of stigmas where people are anxious about that and have been stigmatized by everyone around them. So there's this need, I think, from both sides to separate the thing. And that's something I just want to stress, is that this is absolutely 100% a physical illness. And it has a huge mental health and psychological aspect to it. And to get better, I had to tackle both sides. And I had to...
That's so well said.
In some ways, really dive in on the mental health stuff first, because it had me in a spin. You talked very eloquently about what that spin was and all the transmitters, but it had me in such a spin that I couldn't really make any progress on the physical side of things until I had unlocked myself to a certain extent. And Lauren helped me with that. I went through a 3-day process called the lightning process technique, and it was a 3-day course, half days on Zoom. And she started off by talking to me about the placebo effect, which I know you want to talk about.
Yes.
And as soon as you start talking about the placebo effect, the whole thing falls into place, of course, because we know that the mind can have a healing effect on the body, and doctors know that, and that is measured. And I think in the past it's been used as well, that means this drug doesn't really work. Whereas actually what the placebo effect is fundamentally saying is the mind and the body are very, very connected. And this is both a negative, because you can get yourself in a loop very quickly when you've got physical issues, but it's also a positive if you can turn it round and use it to your advantage.
You can harness it in the right way.
Yeah, and so that was really helpful, and I mean, more than really helpful. That was working on that with Lauren, both in those 3 days, and then I chose to be coached by her afterwards. Was, I was very lucky because she got in touch with me and offered these services as in a pro bono way. She was very generous, and she made me start with to unpick my whole thinking around the fact that actually once you get into these chronic cycles, you start really disliking yourself and really not trusting yourself. And as soon as you get into that quagmire and very sort of boggy way of thinking and slippery self-esteem, self-loathing, then you're stuck. You're totally stuck. So she helped unpick that, but in a very practical, non-woo-woo way, got me thinking about the placebo effect and the way that my neural pathways were going round, flipping around in these really destructive cycles, and how to do visualizations which would set up new pathways and really help me. So that was a really...
Can I pause you? Can I
Yeah.
pause you a second? There are lots of things I want to...
Sure.
So, I mean, I've been as ignorant as everybody else about the placebo effect until about the last kind of 18 months, when I've seen some fascinating documentaries and spoke to neurologists who can really see that it's being dismissed as, oh, it's the placebo, as if that's nothing, when exactly what you're saying, it's the reverse. It's showing us that the mind-body connection is a power that we can harness, and it has unbelievably powerful outcomes. And I've seen research on the placebo effect for cancer, for, you know, really serious illnesses that lots of doctors would raise their eyebrows at, but it has a massive impact. And I'm so glad that Lauren kind of introduced and is the word authenticated?
Validated.
Kind of validated, that's the right word, the importance of the placebo. And Sasha's saying here, yes, long COVID seems very much like many invisible illnesses that are viewed as psychosomatic. How does one share their struggles with family, friends, employers to feel adequately supported? And that is partly the battle, isn't it? Because first of all, the battle is with yourself, is, am I legitimate in having these feelings, and how am I failing, and what am I doing wrong? And until you get a proper mindset about how you can support and stabilize yourself to have a different mindset, you can't even communicate to other people. But then when other people are looking at you kind of like, is she faking it? And also, I mean, I think the word psychosomatic is as misunderstood as the placebo, because it's like saying, well, you've just made it up, mate, you know, get over it. That isn't what it is.
So in terms of communicating to people around you, I mean, one thing I found was when I wrote a second article about my long COVID journey for the Times, and I wasn't yet quite better, but I was probably half to 2/3 of the way through my recovery. I'd really moved on a stage. That people got in touch with me and said, I'm making my friends and family read this because it's not just making them understand it, it's actually making me understand it. And I sometimes have to read what I've written, both in my journals and in articles, to remind myself, because there's this extraordinary trick that your brain keeps playing on you. Yes. Even though I've spent hours writing a document saying exactly what happens to me mentally, and these patches of imposter syndrome and self-doubt, followed by despair, and, you know, this sort of
and more symptoms and a downward spiral of
this
health.
terrible downward spiral, and then the remission, and am I making it up, and this constant sort of exhausting mental fight that you're having with yourself. It's almost like there's a kind of etch-a-sketch bit of your emotional memory, and it just keeps wiping itself clean and gaslighting you. You feel
I was going to say, the word is gaslighting. It is like you're gaslighting yourself in some way.
It's and somehow the virus becomes this you know, in my mind it was this abusive, gaslighting entity, that knew how to, not just physically, because both physically your symptoms, it goes straight for your Achilles heels. It's a very bespoke illness, long COVID, and if you've got gut problems or circulation problems or heart problems, it finds them out.
Your weaknesses.
It finds out your weaknesses, but it finds out your weaknesses on the mental health front. So it knows how to chip away at your self-esteem. And, you know, I'm sort of mocking myself here by making it into a sort of parody monster, but there is this feeling that somehow it seems to have an intention. And so for a long period of time, I found it helpful to think of myself as fighting this virus, and I was a warrior in this, and I had to access my strength, physical and mental. But then Lauren tried to, I think, make me befriend myself more in it rather than try and create an enemy out of the illness, and just give myself a massive break on how you know how up and down these symptoms were, and
Because if
how
you just interrupt you, but when you battle something, which I can see that in some senses, of course, you would need to and want to, but if you battle, of course, it fires up your cortisol and heightens your arousal and inflames your whole system. Whereas if you befriend it, you feel safe in your body, safe in your mind, you're given dopamine and oxytocin. And so you feel calmer and everything kind of drops. And so, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, perfect sense. And on that front, in terms of all those lovely nice chemicals you're talking about that the brain creates, I did find connection was incredibly important. So I was lucky enough to have two very good friends who and now three who had long COVID at the same time as me. And one in particular I was talking to every day about when I was stuck in bed for 4 months, and we were both doing as much research as we could separately, and then coming together and daily checking in with each other. Are you having a bad day? Are you having a good day? How is it?
Having your team, that makes such a difference.
And having a team, God, it was absolutely amazing. And so now I do talk to people, put me in touch with people who are feeling isolated and stuck, because I do think that's another big problem with this. And I am lucky enough to have been, Lauren reached out to me. I have friends who have long COVID. I, had an understanding publisher who let me put my work on pause. But there are so many people who are just completely on their own, and they may well have, maybe they're a single parent, or they've got to keep working, or they can't physically keep working, but their employer doesn't believe them, and they're totally on their own. And I've been scratching my head trying to think about how do we sort of create some kind of network.
I was thinking that because just as you're talking about the network, I mean, what Sarah read next, who I love, by the way, was saying you need your team and that we need connection. But Pillywig was saying, I feel physically and mentally exhausted after having COVID and doubting myself all the time. I mean, do you know the numbers of people with long COVID? I don't know the numbers.
So there are people have different numbers, but if you look up most government numbers will say somewhere between 1 and 2 million have long COVID in the UK. That's in the UK. That's in the UK alone. So, we're talking, it's huge numbers.
And if you think for every person who's ill, if they're lucky, if they have people around them, if they're not kind of isolated, that's probably 8 people, their parents, their siblings, their best friend, their partner, their children, their colleagues, who are affected by it. So that's huge numbers, because when one person is ill in the family, everyone is affected. Your husband, your kids, as you said, your publisher, us readers not being able to get hold of your book. But it has a huge ripple effect. And Dawn, Noel, is saying is that you offer clients shiatsu, and just being present with someone and saying to them you accept them however they are I'm glad you do that. But I can't believe there isn't some big
there
network.
are forums. There are forums, absolutely, and they've got huge followings. But the problem I found with the forums was, there are a couple of Facebook ones, and there are various ones, is that reading them could be very triggering and depressing, because often people who were posting were in despair, or they'd had it for far longer than you and weren't getting any better. And so while on the one hand you were reassured that you weren't the only person, you weren't completely going mad, that this was a real thing, on the other hand, it did just make you panic. So
it inflames your own symptoms, doesn't it? Because
totally, and it's
reading them is a trigger.
Totally. It's like reading really sort of hate-filled Twitter or something. You just
Yeah,
feel
or it's like you've been in a
worse.
car crash and you just read nothing about everything about car
Exactly.
crashes.
So I found it immensely helpful to just seek out one or two people and talk to them regularly and not feel you, because it's exhausting having to start from the beginning as well, to catch up with the whole history of the illness and where you are. Whereas if you have someone who just checks in with you, even if they're a virtual stranger. And the other thing I did, which I made me feel less lonely, was a little bit of journaling. I mean, I didn't have the energy to do much, but sometimes I just write down a mark out of 10 for the morning and the afternoon, because there was this horrible gaslighting lack of memory around it. I needed to know that I'd had a few good days in a row before this awful day had happened, because I'd completely forget about it, and I would assume that I'd been down in the bottom of the pit, as I started to think of it as, for forever.
So unlike you, Venetia B, who's my editor, my lovely editor,
one of my friends for long COVID,
she
yes.
said I find forums totally panicking.
Mm.
And so I can
But it
imagine that.
didn't
So
work.
in a way, what you're saying is, if people are listening who have long COVID, is to gather your mini tribe around you of 3 or 4 people who you don't have to kind of update them all the time because they know and they've experienced it. You're not trying to kind of explain anything,
And
but
you're
you're
not doing
both,
that. Yes.
go
You're
on.
not doing that thing of surfing in the wee hours and finding all these horrible stories that make you despair. And also,
Yeah,
the other point is that forums, I'm imagining, don't get visited very much by people who, like me, have been lucky enough to recover. So you're not getting the good news
the
stories
balance.
either. Yeah. So you're thinking, well, we're all stuck in this forever, and so has, I keep on watching them update, and they've been in this since March 2020, which a lot of people have. And so I'm never gonna get better. Whereas the truth is, there are people getting better, but maybe like me, they're not
There
joining the
isn't a
forum.
recovered forum. There isn't a forum for
No,
people who've recovered.
which would be so helpful. Which would be so helpful.
And each person could say the things, because if every person, like for you, you know, first of all, recognizing this huge psychological component of it, and
Yeah.
then recognizing that you could harness that to support yourself, to reduce the kind of looping and kind of flaming
And
that happened in your body.
to realize that that wasn't an admission of the fact that this illness was not physical. So I think,
Yes,
I think that would be really helpful. I mean, I've befriended it to the point where I'm now writing a novel where my heroine has long COVID. So I'm sticking with the idea, and I'm trying to find the humor and the warmth and all the aspects of it that you because people when someone knows that someone's been ill for a very long time, most people tend to stay away, because actually it's very depressing to be around people who are stuck, and they might have a certain amount of sympathy, and then it will be used up, because everyone wants a narrative where things are getting better.
and
And
also there's, emotions are contagious.
yeah.
So, someone who isn't your best friend who will hang around for the long haul, if you're telling them, 9 months, 18 months, 20 months on, you're still feeling really
Mm.
ill, then the friend begins to sort of panic in a way, like, what can I do? I can't fix you. I can't make you better. And you're not the Kate that we used to go and have fun with, that we used to kind of go out with. And so, but also you lose your identity of that fun person. Of course, that has a negative spiral as well, because I mean, I think the main message we want to get across to everybody, how much of it is psychological and how much that is a real thing, not a made up thing.
Yes, and also, I mean, I was aware. One thing I did become aware of was how many people identified as a long COVID person. So if you look on certain people's Instagram pages or Twitter handles, they'll say long COVID long hauler, or you know, long COVID sufferer, or whatever it is. And that might be helpful for some people, just to call it out and say, look, this is what I'm campaigning on, and this is what is very important to me. But for me, that just got me deeper into the rabbit hole. The idea that this was who I
This
was.
is who you are now. This is
This was my
your
identity.
new fixed identity.
This was my new fixed identity. So I didn't find that helpful at all, and I had to be really careful, specifically, and this was something that Lauren talks a lot about, with my language around, am I a sick person or am I a person in recovery? You know, things like that, which are just subtle things, make a huge difference to your sense of self. And am I waking up in the morning and looking at the things that are feeling better, or am I looking at the things that are not working today? And, you know, how do you do that mental scan of yourself? You know, which filter are you going to put on it, you know, that day? So I think there are a lot of linguistic and just sort of phrases that really you have to interrogate and make sure that you're not causing more panic in your system.
Because like Venetia is saying, I agree, that made me panic, kind of identifying as long COVID. She called it, I called it medium COVID.
I thought that was genius. I love the
that
fact
is
that
totally genius. It's absolutely
I thought that was
genius.
brilliant, because she was saying, actually, I'm not in this forever, and I'll admit that it's going on longer than most people, or it's changed into something else. Because that's something I should mention as well, is a lot of people just simply think that it's about feeling a bit fluff after you've had COVID. And actually, what it seems to be is some kind of syndrome where either they don't quite know yet, but whether your immune is attacking itself, or whether it's a mast cell activation. There are lots of different theories about, or whether your mitochondria are not delivering energy around your system. There are lots of different medical theories that they haven't yet landed on one. But all of these kind of aspects are possible. I've lost my train now. That's going to sound like with a brain fog.
But I tell you what, where I'm coming to, and we need to end in a minute, is it is holding both. That on the one hand, this is an illness. This is not something that someone just has a little bit of a headache and they're having a lazy day. So
Right.
This is a real illness. And as you said, the research hasn't quite delivered on what the root of it or the cause of it is. And so you have to name and acknowledge it's an illness. And at the same time, you have to acknowledge the psychological aspect, which your attitude in the psychological aspect has a big influence on your outcome. Absolutely. So when you hold, I am a sufferer of long COVID, and every day you wake up looking for your symptoms, that in some ways fires up the inflammation, the impact of the pathways that you get stuck in, and you get a flare up. If you acknowledge the truth that you've got long COVID or medium COVID, or however you frame it, and you go for the hope, like I am looking today for my positive attitude, I am looking, that you have a mindset that isn't looking for danger, but is looking for what is good today, that I have agency and control over, that will set up that pathway where you have the dopamine, the oxytocin, where you feel calmer, where you then get more energy, and you don't deplete your system by going on fire with fear.
Brilliantly put. But also on the days that that's simply not possible, because some days you feel like you're under soggy dust sheets and you can't get out, you're just stuck in that feeling. Those are the days where I found having a small team really helpful, because you could get in touch with someone else in your team who was having a better day, and they could remind you, actually just do your breathing right now, or
your meditation,
remember how you felt on Tuesday, or all of these little aspects. And it could really change very quickly. You could feel your system calm down, and in that calming, suddenly the hope just allowed so much more health. And it was it's been
Incredible.
it's extraordinary. And I now have got to the point, nearly, I won't say completely near, but nearly, where I feel that I'm glad I had long COVID. Not that it wasn't the most miserable and, I would say, traumatic experience of my adult life, but that it also gave me a real understanding of quite how much I can use my mind to deal with my health, and also how much my mind is playing tricks on me, and what I need to do to keep it
Clear.
steady enough and clear enough to not be my own worst enemy.
I mean, I think that's a wonderful way to end. And I think, as Sasha has said, we've both articulated beautifully the difficulty and isolation of living with a chronic condition, especially those with no immediate cure, and remaining connected. So it's the two things, isn't it? I mean, there are many conditions, including long COVID, that don't have an immediate cure and are often illegitimized as being, you know, psychosomatic. But having your small team, your connection with people that were really there for you and could put one little prop of support, do a meditation, remember Tuesday, those small things can switch. But also recognizing how much the mind has to play. The mind-body connection is not to be underestimated. The placebo effect is a big thing. It is not a nothing, as is often
It's huge.
thought.
It's huge. And lastly, to really look into mindset techniques, to really look out for those practitioners, NLP, the Gupta technique. There are different ones, and they all do harness this, and they're all essentially doing the same thing, which is just calming the whole nervous system down and allowing your body, just giving it a fighting chance.
Yeah. I am so glad you have recovered. I am full of admiration for you. My goodness.
Well, it's been epic.
Awful.
Yeah, it's been epic, and I feel wildly grateful in that way that you do when you've just had a bad cold for a while, and then you pop out the other end and you actually feel better for just being normal. I do actually feel like, okay, I've got a different kind of strength from this, and something has been added rather than taken away from this really ghastly, awful experience.
I mean, in the trade, that's called post-traumatic growth, in that you have taken your perception of what matters and your gratitude for just being, for health is no longer just health. It's like you're not taking it for granted for a minute. And that feels like such a joyous thing.
I'm going to hold on to that. Yes. Okay. Post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
Great. I love that. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you, everyone, for your comments and engagement and for joining us.
Good luck, everyone.
And Mindful in May is currently happening, so a great way to approach this. Thanks, Sasha. Thank you all. Lots of love.
Bye.
Bye.